So on the 30th of May, I made a fairly standard FOI request for the incoming government brief given to the Minister for Government Services. I was told by your FOI officers, well, they asked whether I could withdraw my request because another applicant had made the same request. I've never encountered that before dealing with another government department or agency. Why was I asked to withdraw a request simply because someone else had made the request?
Senator Randall Brugeau, Chief Operating Officer. So in terms of FOI requests, we would typically provide, if there is a similar identical request, the information once and then have that available on the disclosure log.
I'm glad you said that because that was the second problem. I was then told that once this FOI to someone else was successful, I would then, rather than having just to access it from the disclosure log, download it from the disclosure log, I would have to put in a new request for the copy of the document released to someone else, which would be processed within 7 days. Why should I have to make a request for something that's already been released to someone else and then wait 7 days to receive it?
So, Senator, we received your letter requesting information about how we could improve access to the disclosure log. We are in the final stages of adjusting our process such that all FOI requests that are available on the disclosure log will be available to download from our website. Those which are older than 12 months old will need to be managed through a request process.
I welcome that, thank you, because it is contrary to FOI guidelines, which explicitly state that agencies must make FOI documents immediately available to download unless there's a technical reason why it cannot be uploaded to a disclosure log. And it's completely out of step with every other government department or agency I've dealt with. Treasury, Finance, Home Affairs, PM&C, Foreign Affairs and Trade, AGs, they all just have a log of the files that have been granted access that anyone can download. How long has Services Australia had this approach?
I'm unsure, Senator, as to how long we've had this approach. I can tell you, though, that it will be adjusted such that you'll be able to, and anybody else that wishes to draw from the disclosure log will be able to access that by the end of this calendar year.
Thank you. That's very welcome. What's the reason that Services Australia has had this different approach compared to other agencies?
I don't have the history, Senator. I could take on notice the history and provide more details as to the decisions that may have been made by my predecessors. That's a good idea. Yeah, if you could take it on notice, I'd appreciate that. And thank you for being responsive to my request. I appreciate that, and I hope that'll promote better transparency for all FOI users with Services Australia, of which I assume you have many. We do.
All right, legends, buckle up, because this one's a doozy. Services Australia, the mob that's meant to keep the gears of government grinding smoothly for the rest of us mere mortals, has finally been dragged kicking and screaming into the sunlight. Yeah, we're talking about their FOI system. That's freedom of information for those lucky enough never to have tangled with government red tape. The department's just announced it's overhauling how it handles those requests, all in the name of restoring transparency. Sounds good on paper, right? But if you've ever tried getting info out of a government agency, you know that transparency can sometimes feel about as clear as Vegemite on toast. Before we unpack this absolute Services Australia circus, where a senator exposed the government's so-called transparency system and the department scrambled harder than a Centrelink website on budget day, smash that like button like you're shredding bureaucratic red tape. Subscribe if you're done watching Canberra pretend secrecy's a feature, not a flaw. And grab the Who Voted for this shirt, links in the description. Now, the story kicks off with one senator, sharp as a tack and clearly fed up, recounting what should have been a routine FOI request. The bloke wanted a copy of the incoming government brief given to the Minister for Government Services. Straightforward enough. It's the kind of thing journalists, watchdogs, and curious Aussies request all the time. But instead of getting the document, or even the usual bureaucratic runaround, this senator got something weird. The FOI officer, bless their soul, actually asked if he'd consider withdrawing his request. Why? Because someone else had already made the same one. I know, mate, it sounds like a setup for a sketch on Utopia. Imagine that. You go to order a flat white at your local cafe, and the barista says, "Oh nah, someone else already ordered that. You sure you still want one?" That's the level of logic we're dealing with here. Apparently, Services Australia thought if two people wanted the same document, one of them had to step aside like it was a game of bureaucratic musical chairs. That alone tells you how cooked this system's been for years. Now, the senator, keeping his cool, mind you, politely but firmly asked why on earth that was happening. Because let's be honest, FOI laws aren't exactly a new invention. The idea is simple. Any Aussie has the right to access government-held information unless there's a genuine reason not to. But over time, that simple right's been wrapped up tighter than a sausage roll in puff pastry. And Services Australia, of all departments, managed to take that already clunky process and make it worse. When he pressed for an answer, in steps Randall Bruge, the Chief Operating Officer of Services Australia. Calm, collected, bureaucratic. You can practically hear the PR gears grinding in his head. He explained that when there's a similar or identical request, the department just provides the info once, puts it on their disclosure log, and calls it a day. Sounds efficient, yeah? But here's where it gets messy and where the senator's patience started to evaporate. See, the FOI officer had told him something totally different. They said that even once another applicant's request was successful and the document got released, he'd still need to file his own separate request to get a copy of it. Then, wait up to 7 days for it to be processed. 7 bloody days for a document that was already public. It's like asking to borrow a mate's copy of the paper and being told you need to apply in writing, wait a week, and pay an admin fee before you can read yesterday's headlines. The senator didn't miss a beat. He called it what it was, absurd. And he's right. Every other department, Treasury, Home Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Finance, they all just chuck those documents up on a disclosure log that anyone can download straight away. No extra forms, no hoops, no nonsense. But Services Australia? Nah. They decided to reinvent the wheel, and not in a good way. Now, to his credit, Randall didn't try to spin it into some wild excuse. He actually acknowledged the issue and admitted the process was being changed. Apparently, they're in the final stages of adjusting the system so that FOI requests listed on the disclosure log can be downloaded directly from the website, no extra steps. Cue the slow clap, right? After years of confusion and unnecessary bureaucracy, they're finally catching up to what every other government agency's been doing since the early 2000s. And look, the senator gave credit where it was due. He said it was a good move, and honestly it is. But the fact that it took a senator sitting in a public hearing to get that answer tells you everything about how broken the system's been. Because make no mistake, legends, this isn't just some nerdy admin issue. This is about how transparent our government actually is. The FOI system is one of the only tools Aussies have to see what's going on behind the curtain. It's how journalists uncover dodgy deals, how watchdogs hold agencies to account, and how everyday people can make sure taxpayer money's being spent where it should be. When that system gets twisted, slowed down, or deliberately made confusing, it's not just annoying, it's dangerous for democracy. So when Services Australia says it's overhauling its FOI system to restore transparency, you can't help but raise an eyebrow. Because if you have to restore transparency, that means you lost it somewhere along the way. And mate, they didn't just misplace it under a pile of paperwork, they buried it in a bureaucratic grave. Let's rewind a bit. Services Australia's whole job is to deliver services efficiently, Centrelink, Medicare, all that jazz. They're meant to be the backbone of how ordinary Aussies interact with the government. But anyone who's ever tried calling Centrelink knows that efficiency isn't exactly their middle name. It's not that the workers don't care. Most of them are doing their best under pressure. It's the system itself that's cooked. Layers of red tape, outdated processes, and decisions made by people who haven't had to fill out a form in their lives. So when you see this FOI debacle, it's not just an isolated blunder. It's a symptom of a bigger culture of secrecy and sluggishness. Somewhere along the line, transparency became a slogan instead of a standard. Departments started treating public information like it was private property, guarded by gatekeepers who seemed allergic to accountability. The senator, clearly over it, pointed out that this whole thing flies in the face of FOI guidelines. Those guidelines literally require agencies to make documents available to download unless there's a technical reason they can't. And not some vague, we'll get to it eventually reason, an actual technical one. Services Australia's excuse? None, really. They just didn't bother. Now, to be fair, Randall promised that by the end of the calendar year, everyone will be able to access the documents straight from the disclosure log, which is good news if they actually follow through. Because we've all heard that line before, haven't we? We're reviewing our processes. We're implementing new measures. We're taking feedback on board. Translation: we'll think about it, but don't hold your breath. The senator, ever the gentleman, thanked him for being responsive, said he appreciated it, and even threw in a hopeful note about better transparency for all FOI users. But let's be real, the bar was on the floor. Services Australia wasn't innovating. They were just fixing something that never should have been broken in the first place. Still, this whole exchange shines a light on something bigger, the culture of secrecy that creeps into government agencies like mold in an old rental. It starts small. Maybe a manager decides certain documents don't need to be uploaded right away. Maybe they think it's safer to make people apply individually so they can track who's asking for what. Before you know it, you've got a system that's more about protecting the agency than serving the public. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? Transparency shouldn't be something the public has to beg for. It should be baked into how the government operates. You shouldn't need a senator to sit across from a senior bureaucrat and ask why downloading a public document feels like applying for a visa. But credit where it's due, this hearing mattered. It forced Services Australia to admit their process was outdated and to commit, on record, to fixing it. That's a small win for transparency, maybe even a rare one. And in today's political climate, that's worth celebrating. Now, I know some of you watching are probably thinking, mate, it's just paperwork. Who cares? But here's the thing. This is exactly how accountability starts to slip. It's never in big, dramatic ways at first. It's in the quiet, procedural stuff, the systems that make it harder for people to access information, the policies that delay disclosure, the excuses that turn a right into a privilege. Before long, the government's controlling the narrative, not the people. And when that happens, trust goes out the window. Australians aren't naive. We know politics is messy. But we expect fairness, honesty, and a bit of common sense. When we see bureaucrats hiding behind jargon and process, it feeds the cynicism that's already eating away at public trust. That's why this story matters. Because Services Australia isn't just some back office department, it's one of the biggest faces of government. When they mess up transparency, it sends a message that accountability is optional. And when they fix it, it's not just good admin, it's a sign that maybe, just maybe, the system can still work for the people it's meant to serve. Now, I've got to say, watching this exchange between the senator and Randall, you can feel the awkwardness. Randall's trying to stay composed, using that classic bureaucratic language where every sentence sounds like it's been focus grouped to death. We are in the final stages of adjusting our process translation. Yeah, mate, we stuffed it up, but we'll fix it before Christmas. Meanwhile, the senator's sitting there thinking, how did we even get here? Because this isn't a new problem. Journalists and advocacy groups have been calling out slow FOI processes for years. Some requests take months, even years, to be fulfilled. Others get rejected on flimsy grounds like too resource-intensive or contrary to the public interest, which, let's be honest, often just means this'll make us look bad. And that's the bit that really grinds my gears. The whole point of FOI laws is to serve the public interest, not protect the government from embarrassment. If an agency's scared of what the public might think, maybe the problem isn't the request, maybe it's what's in the document. Now, Services Australia isn't the only offender. Plenty of departments have had their fair share of transparency blunders, but there's something especially rich about the agency that handles people's most personal data, incomes, health details, social benefits, being so cagey about its own workings. They expect Australians to hand over everything from tax records to Medicare claims without blinking. But when someone asks to see how decisions are made, suddenly, it's, oh sorry, you'll need to submit a formal request and wait 7 days. The irony writes itself, doesn't it? Still, it's kind of poetic that it took a senator's persistence to push this conversation into the open, because it's not just about one document or one process. It's about setting a precedent. If Services Australia can be held accountable and forced to modernize its FOI system, then maybe, just maybe, other agencies will follow. And let's be honest, they could all use a bit of shaking up. The digital age has changed everything about how we share and access information. Yet somehow, parts of government are still operating like it's 1999, when you needed a fax machine and a dial-up connection to get anything done. Transparency in 2025 shouldn't mean filling out a form and waiting a week. It should mean instant access, digital records, open data, the works. But for that to happen, the culture has to shift, because no amount of new software or process adjustments can fix a mindset that sees information as something to be hoarded. Until public servants genuinely believe that transparency is their job, not a nuisance, these problems will keep cropping up. Now, I'll admit, I'm giving Randall a bit of stick here, but at least he didn't try to dodge the questions. He took it on notice when he didn't know the answer, promised to get the history, and owned up to the fact that things were changing. That's rare these days. Most bureaucrats would have danced around the issue until the clock ran out. So credit where it's due, he faced the music. But I can't help wondering how long this different approach had been in place. Because when the senator asked that, Randall didn't know. He said he didn't have the history. Which, let's face it, is bureaucrat speak for, this system's been broken longer than I've been in the job. You don't just wake up one morning and decide to make people reapply for documents that are already public. That kind of inefficiency takes years to perfect. Still, the senator's reaction said it all, calm but pointed. He thanked Randall, sure, but you could tell he was thinking about time. Because it shouldn't take a formal hearing to get an agency to follow the basic principles of its own laws. That's the kind of stuff that should be automatic. And that's what this whole overhaul is really about, catching up to common sense. Services Australia can talk all at once about process adjustments and technical upgrades, but at the end of the day, this is about trust. When you deal with people's welfare payments, medical reimbursements, and sensitive data, the least you can do is be upfront about how you operate. If this overhaul actually delivers what they're promising, easy access, faster processing, less red tape, then it's a win for everyone. It'll save time for the staff, make life easier for journalists and watchdogs, and most importantly, restore a bit of faith in the system. But I'll believe it when I see it. Because history tells us these promises often fizzle out once the spotlight fades. Still, this hearing feels like a turning point, one of those small, quiet moments that could lead to bigger change. And I reckon that's worth talking about. Because transparency isn't just a policy issue, it's a cultural one. It's about respect for the public, for democracy, for the idea that government doesn't own information, it just holds it on our behalf. So here's hoping this isn't just another headline that fades away. Here's hoping Services Australia really does overhaul its FOI system, not just to tick a box, but to actually live up to the values it's supposed to represent. Because in a time when trust in institutions is hanging by a thread, even a small act of transparency can go a long way. And if they actually follow through, if by the end of the year, you can jump online, click a link, and download the information you need without having to play bureaucratic bingo, then I'll be the first to say, good on ya, Services Australia. Until then, I'll keep my expectations realistic and my sarcasm sharp. Because let's face it, legends, when it comes to government promises, it's always best to keep your receipts. Now, you might think that's the end of the story. Bureaucrats promise change, Senator nods approvingly, everyone goes home happy. But this is Aussie politics we're talking about. There's always more to the story. The fact that it took this kind of exchange to spark reform tells you there's a deeper problem lurking under the surface, a problem with how government sees accountability. See, transparency isn't just about documents or data, it's about attitude. When a public servant gets asked a question, do they instinctively reach for a reason not to answer? Or do they think, yeah, the public deserves to know? Too often, it's the former. Years of cautious culture, of political sensitivity, have trained departments to protect rather than reveal. And that's how we end up here, with systems that make simple information retrieval feel like a national security operation. But the senator's persistence here, that's what cuts through. He didn't let it slide. He didn't settle for, that's just how it is. He kept pushing until Randall had to admit the system was outdated. That's how accountability happens, one awkward, televised conversation at a time. And let's be honest, we could use more of that energy in Canberra. Too often, these hearings are just political theatre, long monologues, polite evasions, and a few sound bites for the evening news. But this one? It actually achieved something. It reminded Services Australia and the rest of the public service that transparency isn't optional. It's the law. So, legends, next time you hear a politician or bureaucrat talking about restoring transparency, remember this story. Because it's not just about one department fixing a broken website. It's about a shift in power, however small, back to the people who deserve it. And hey, if that means one less hoop to jump through, one less delay, and one more reason to believe the system can still work, I'll take that any day. So here's to the slow, stubborn march toward transparency. It's not glamorous, it's not fast, but it's bloody important. And if Services Australia's overhaul is the start of something bigger, if it sparks even a little competition between departments to do better, then maybe, just maybe, the tide's turning. Till then, stay sharp, stay cheeky, and never stop asking questions, even when they tell you not to. Because that's how democracy stays alive, legends. And as always, if you enjoyed watching the government squirm its way into doing the right thing, smash that like button harder than a Senate gavel, grab the Who Voted for This shirt, links in the description, subscribe for more political breakdowns, and remember, Transparency shouldn't need a PR campaign. It should just be the bloody default.